Sarah Chun wiped the sweat from her forehead as she finished checking the metal supports in. Engineering Bay 7? The work was hard, but she liked it. Metal was honest. It did what it was supposed to do. It did not lie or pretend to be something. It was not. The deep space mining platform called Kepler's Edge was huge. It floated in the darkness between the stars, pulling valuable metals from the asteroid field that surrounded it. Sarah had been working here for 6 months now. Every day was the same. She would wake up, eat her simple breakfast, and go down to the lower levels where the humans worked. The platform was beautiful in its own way. The upper levels were made from crystal that glowed with soft blue light. The Zephyrians had built those parts. They were tall beings made of living crystal who thought they were better than everyone else. Their technology was smooth and clean and seemed to work like magic. Sarah worked in the older sections. These parts were made from steel and iron and copper. They looked rough compared to the crystal sections above, but Sarah knew something the Zephyrians did not know. The metal sections worked. They kept working when other things broke. They were strong in ways that pretty crystal could never be. Her job was to test the rocks that came from the asteroids. She would take small pieces and heat them up, cool them down, and see what they were made of. She also fixed the old machines that the Zephyrians did not want to use anymore. They called her equipment primitive and outdated. They said humans were good for simple work, but could not understand real technology. Sarah did not argue with them. She just did her job. On this morning, like every morning, she started her tests on the new rock samples. The asteroid field had been giving them lots of good metal lately. Iron, copper, platinum, and other valuable things. The Zephyrians were happy because they were making lots of money, but as Sarah looked at her readings, she saw something strange. Her old computer showed numbers that did not make sense. The rocks were giving off some kind of energy. It was very small, but it was there. The energy seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. Sometimes it was stronger, sometimes weaker, but it never stopped. Sarah frowned and ran the test again. The same. Strange reading came back. She walked over to her metal detector, an old machine that the Zephyrians laughed at. They said their crystal scanners were much better. But Sarah's metal detector was picking up something their fancy equipment missed. The rocks were not just ordinary rocks. Deep inside them was a kind of crystal that Sarah had never seen before. It was not like the living crystal that made up the Zephyrians. This crystal was different. It was sleeping, but Sarah could tell it wanted to wake up. She spent the whole morning running more tests. Every test showed the same thing. The strange crystal was in all the new rocks. And it was getting stronger. By lunchtime, Sarah knew she had to tell someone. She walked up to the middle levels where the Zephyrian engineers worked. Their section was all smooth curves and glowing walls. Everything hummed with quiet power. Sarah always felt out of place here with her dirty work clothes and simple tools. She found Chief Engineer Veltar in the main control room. He was tall, even for a Zephyrian, and his crystal body sparkled with different colors when he moved. His voice sounded like music when he spoke, but Sarah could hear the coldness in it. "What do you want, human?" Veltar asked without looking up from his glowing control panel. "Sir, I found something in the rock samples," Sarah said. "There's a kind of crystal in them that's giving off energy. I think it might be important." Veltar finally looked at her. His crystal face showed no expression, but Sarah could feel his annoyance. "Your primitive equipment is clearly broken," he said. "Our crystal matrix scanners have analyzed every rock in this field. There are no unusual energy readings." "But, sir, my tests show—" "Your tests are wrong," Veltar cut her off. "Human technology is centuries behind ours. You cannot detect things that our advanced sensors cannot see. Go back to your work and stop wasting my time." Sarah felt her face get hot, but she kept her voice calm. "Could you at least look at my data?" Veltar made a sound that might have been laughter. "I do not need to look at data from broken human machines. If there was anything important in those rocks, our systems would have found it already." He turned back to his panel, making it clear that the conversation was over. Sarah walked back to her section feeling frustrated. She had been sure that Veltar would listen to her. The energy readings were real. Her equipment might be old, but it was not broken. She checked and double-checked her machines every day. Doc in Engineering Bay 7, she ran the tests again. The strange energy was still there. In fact, it seemed to be getting stronger. She tried talking to some of the other workers. The Krydek were insect-like beings who worked in the mining sections. They were good at following orders, but did not like to think about things that were not their job. When Sarah showed them her readings, they just clicked their mandibles and went back. To work, the Soros were large reptile-like beings who worked in maintenance. They were stronger than any other species on the platform, but they trusted the Zephyrians to make all the important decisions. If Chief Engineer says no problem, then no problem, was all they would say. The nebulae were the strangest of all. They were beings made of gas and energy who worked in the power sections. They could barely speak in words that other species understood. Sarah tried to show them her readings, but they just swirled around and made noises that might have meant anything. By the end of the day, Sarah felt very alone. She was the only one who could see what was happening. The only one who thought it might be dangerous. But no one would listen to her because she was just a human with old equipment. That night, Sarah lay in her small room and thought about what to do. She could write a report and send it to the platform commander. But the commander was also a Zephyrian, and he would probably just ask Veltar what he thought about it. She could try to contact the mining company's headquarters, but that would take weeks, and by then it might be too late for whatever was happening. Or she could keep studying the strange crystal herself. She could try to understand what it was and what it might do. It would not be easy with just her old equipment, but Sarah had always been good at solving problems with simple tools. The next morning, Sarah decided to learn everything she could about the strange crystal. She started by looking at where it came from. The asteroid field was huge, with thousands of rocks floating in the darkness. But the rocks with the strange crystal all came from the same area, a section that the miners had only started working on last week. Sarah pulled up the mining records on her old computer. The Zephyrians kept most information on their crystal networks, but the basic mining data was stored on the older systems too. She found what she was looking for. The new mining area was different from the rest of the asteroid field. The rocks there were older and came from deeper in space. They had been floating in the darkness for millions of years before the mining platform found them. Sarah studied the chemical makeup of the strange crystal. It was unlike anything in the databases. It seemed to be part mineral and part something else. Something that might have been alive once long ago. The most interesting thing was how the crystal reacted to energy. When Sarah's scanning beam hit it, the crystal would pulse back with its own energy. It was like the crystal was trying to talk to the scanning beam, and the pulse was getting stronger every day. Sarah began to worry. What would happen when the crystal got strong enough? What was it trying to do? She spent her free time reading everything she could find about crystals and energy and resonance. Most of the information was in the Zephyrian databases, which she was not supposed to access. But Sarah had learned to be very good with computers over the years. She found ways to read the files she needed without anyone noticing. What she learned made her even more worried. Crystals could store energy and release it again. They could also amplify energy, making weak signals much stronger. And under the right conditions, crystals could create something called resonance cascade. This happened when one crystal would start vibrating and make other crystals vibrate too. The vibration would get stronger and stronger until something broke. Sarah looked around at the crystal walls and equipment that surrounded her. The entire upper section of the platform was made from Zephyrian crystal technology. If the strange crystals in the asteroids could create resonance cascade, what would happen to all that crystal technology? She tried one more time to warn Veltar. This time she brought printouts of all her data and research. She had prepared a simple explanation that anyone could understand. Veltar did not even let her finish talking. "Human, I have told you before that your equipment is malfunctioning," he said, with more annoyance than before. "Now you are wasting even more of my time with your primitive theories. If you continue to bother me with this nonsense, I will have you transferred to waste management. Sarah left his office feeling defeated. No one would listen. No one wanted to hear what a human had to say about crystal technology. But as she walked back to her section, Sarah made a decision. If no one else would prepare for what might happen, then she would prepare by herself. She had always been good at fixing things and solving problems. Maybe she could find a way to protect the platform even if no one believed her. Sarah spent the rest of the week quietly getting ready. She checked all the old human-built systems on the platform. She made sure the steel supports were strong and the mechanical backups were working. She moved extra supplies to the lower levels where the human equipment was kept. She told no one what she was doing. To everyone else, it looked like she was just doing regular maintenance work. But Sarah was preparing for something that no one else could see coming. The strange energy in the crystals kept getting stronger every day. Sarah's equipment showed the readings climbing higher and higher. Soon, something was going to happen. Sarah did not know exactly what, but she knew it would not be good for the crystal technology that everyone else trusted so much. She just hoped that when the time came, her simple steel and iron equipment would be enough to save them all. 3 days later, Sarah woke up to the sound of metal groaning. At first, she thought it was just the normal sounds of the platform. Big space stations always made noise as they moved through space and worked their machines. But this sound was different. It was deeper and seemed to come from everywhere at once. Sarah got dressed quickly and went to her workstation. Her old computers were showing readings that made her heart beat faster. The energy from the strange crystals in the asteroids was much stronger now. The numbers on her screen were higher than they had ever been. She ran to the window that looked out at the asteroid field. What she saw made her gasp. The asteroids were moving, not floating slowly like they usually did, but actually moving back and forth like they were shaking. Some of the smaller rocks were spinning fast. Others seemed to be pushing against each other, and there was a strange glow coming from deep inside many of the asteroids. Sarah grabbed her portable scanner and ran up to the observation deck. This was one of the few places where humans were allowed in the upper levels, but only during off-duty hours. She was not supposed to be there during work time, but she needed to see what was happening. The observation deck had big windows that showed the whole asteroid field. Sarah could see that the movement was getting worse. Asteroids that had been in the same place for months were now drifting away from their positions. The mining ships that were working in the field looked tiny next to the huge rocks that were starting to move around them. Sarah set up her scanner and pointed at asteroids. The readings were incredible. The energy was not just coming from a few rocks anymore. It was coming from hundreds of them. And they all seemed to be pulsing at the same time, like a giant heartbeat. "What are you doing here?" Sarah spun around. Chief Engineer Veltar was standing behind her, and he looked very angry. His crystal body was flashing red, which Sarah knew meant he was upset. "Sir, you need to see this," Sarah said, pointing her scanner at the asteroids. "The energy readings are off the charts. The whole field is becoming unstable." Veltar looked out at the asteroids. Sarah could see that even he was starting to notice the movement. But instead of listening to her, he became more angry. "You are not allowed to be here during work hours," he said. "And you are certainly not allowed to use unauthorized equipment in this section. Go back to your station immediately." "But sir, please look at the readings," Sarah begged. "Something is happening out there. The asteroids are moving because of some kind of resonance effect. If it gets stronger..." "Enough." Veltar's voice was so loud it hurt Sarah's ears. "I have had enough of your human paranoia. Our sensors show no dangerous activity. The asteroids are simply responding to normal gravitational changes. This is perfectly normal for asteroid fields." Sarah wanted to argue, but she could see it was no use. Veltar had made up his mind. He would not listen to anything a human said, no matter what the evidence showed. She packed up her scanner and left the observation deck. But as she walked back to the lower levels, she could feel the platform shaking more. The groaning sound was getting louder too. Back in Engineering Bay 7, Sarah tried to focus on her work, but it was hard to concentrate when the readings on her equipment kept getting worse. The energy from the asteroids was growing so fast that she had to keep adjusting her scanners to measure it. Around lunchtime, other people started to notice that something was wrong. Craig H., one of the Krydic workers, came to Sarah's station. His insect eyes looked worried. "Human Sarah," he clicked in his broken way of speaking. "Mining Ship 7 reports strange vibrations. Captain say maybe equipment malfunction. You check?" Sarah looked at her screens. Mining Ship 7 was working in the part of the asteroid field where the energy readings were strongest. "The ship is fine," she told Craig H. "The problem is with the asteroids. They're giving off energy that's making everything shake." Craig's antennae twitched nervously. He did not understand much about energy and crystals, but he could see that Sarah was very worried. "What we do?" he asked. "I don't know yet," Sarah said honestly. "But maybe we should tell the mining ships to move away from the asteroids that are shaking the most." Craig nodded and hurried away. A few minutes later, Sarah heard him on the radio trying to warn the mining ships. But the ship captains were all Zephyrians, and they would not listen to advice from a Krydic worker. The afternoon got worse. Sarah watched her readings climb higher and higher. The asteroids were not just moving randomly anymore. They seemed to be forming patterns, like they were trying to line up with each other, and the sound was getting louder. It was not just groaning. Now, Sarah could hear a high-pitched whining noise that seemed to come from the crystal sections of the platform. It was very quiet, but it was there. Sarah knew what that sound meant. It was the sound of crystal under stress. The Zephyrian crystal technology was starting to feel the effects of the energy coming from the asteroids. She tried to call Veltar on the communication system, but he would not answer her calls. She tried to send him messages, but they came back marked deleted without reading. Sarah realized that she was completely on her own. She spent the rest of the day preparing for what she was sure was coming. She moved more supplies to the steel sections of the platform. She checked all the old human-built emergency systems. She made sure the mechanical doors would still work if the electronic systems failed. Most importantly, she started rerouting power away from the crystal systems and into the old steel and wire backups. This was very dangerous work. If anyone caught her doing it, she would be in serious trouble. But Sarah was afraid that soon the crystal systems would not work at all. That evening, Sarah was working late in the power distribution room when Thomas's, one of the Soros maintenance workers, found her. "Human Sarah," he said in his deep, slow voice. "Why you work on old power systems? Zephyrian systems work fine." Sarah looked up at the big reptile-like being. Thomas's was not as smart as some of the other species, but he was honest and practical. Maybe he would listen to her. "Thomas's, I need to tell you something important," Sarah said. "The asteroids out there are giving off energy that's going to damage the crystal systems. When that happens, only the old systems will still work." Thomas's blinked his large eyes slowly. "Zephyrian systems very advanced. How asteroids hurt them." Sarah tried to explain it in simple terms. "You know how sometimes when you hit a piece of metal with a hammer, it makes a ringing sound? And if you hit it just right, the ringing gets louder and louder until the metal breaks?" Thomas's nodded. He understood tools and metal. "The asteroids are like hammers," Sarah continued. "And the crystal systems are like the metal. The asteroids are hitting the crystals with energy instead of hammers. Soon the crystals will start ringing, so loud that they break." Thomas's thought about this for a long time. Finally, he said, "If crystal systems break, what happens to platform?" "That's why I'm getting the old systems ready," Sarah said. "Steel and iron don't ring the same way crystals do. The old systems should keep working even when the crystal ones break." Thomas's looked around at the old power cables and mechanical switches that Sarah was working on. "You sure about this?" "No," Sarah said honestly. "But I'd rather be ready for something that doesn't happen than not ready for something that does." Thomas's nodded slowly. "Thomas's help," he said. "Tell me what to do." Sarah felt a wave of relief. Finally, someone was willing to listen to her and help. She gave Thomas's simple jobs like moving cables and checking connections. He worked quietly and carefully, asking questions when he did not understand something. While they worked, Sarah explained more about what she thought was going to happen. The energy from the asteroids was building up like water behind a dam. When it got strong enough, it would burst out and hit every piece of crystal technology on the platform at once. How long? Thomas asked. Sarah looked at her latest readings. The energy was climbing faster now. Maybe 2 days, she said. Maybe less. They worked through the night, getting the backup systems ready. Sarah showed Thomas how to switch power from the crystal systems to the mechanical ones. She taught him which emergency procedures to follow if the main computers stopped working. The next morning, things got much worse. Sarah was woken up by alarms. Not the gentle chimes that the Zephyrian systems usually made, but harsh buzzing sounds from the old human warning systems. That meant something was wrong with the basic life support systems. She ran to her workstation and saw readings that made her stomach feel sick. The energy from the asteroids had jumped to levels that her equipment could barely measure. And now it was not just energy anymore. The asteroids were actually glowing. Sarah ran to the observation deck, not caring if she got in trouble. When she looked out at the asteroid field, she could see the glow even without her scanner. Hundreds of asteroids were giving off a strange blue-white light. Some of them were spinning so fast they looked like glowing wheels. And the mining ships were in trouble. Mining Ship 7 was trying to move away from an asteroid that was glowing very brightly. But the ship seemed to be moving slowly, like it was fighting against something. Mining Ship 3 had stopped moving completely and was just floating near a group of glowing rocks. Sarah grabbed a communication panel and tried to call the mining ships. This is Dr. Chun in engineering. All mining ships need to return to the platform immediately. The asteroids are becoming dangerous. Who is this? Came a sharp voice from Mining Ship 7. Sarah recognized Captain Zeval, a Zephyrian who had never spoken to her before. This is Dr. Sarah Chun, metallurgist. The asteroids are giving off energy that's interfering with crystal-based systems. You need to get away from them now. Ridiculous, Captain Zeval replied. Our ships are functioning perfectly. Stop using emergency channels for your human superstitions. Sarah watched in horror as Mining Ship 7 suddenly jerked to one side. Its smooth crystal hull was starting to develop cracks and its blue glow was flickering. Captain, your hull is breaking apart, Sarah called into the radio. The resonance is tearing your ship apart from the inside. But the radio was already going dead. The crystal-based communication systems were starting to fail. Sarah ran through the platform, trying to warn everyone she could find. But most of the aliens still trusted the Zephyrian technology. They could not believe that their advanced systems could be hurt by simple rocks in space. Only Thomas's and a few other practical-minded workers listened to her. Together they worked frantically to get more backup systems online and move essential supplies to the steel sections. By evening, the platform was shaking constantly. The whining sound from the crystal sections was loud enough for everyone to hear. And out in the asteroid field, the glow was getting brighter. Sarah knew they were almost out of time. Soon, the cascade would reach its peak, and every piece of crystal technology on the platform would start tearing itself apart. She made one last attempt to warn Chief Engineer Veltar. She found him in the main control room, staring at his instruments with confusion. For the first time since Sarah had known him, Veltar looked uncertain. Sir, Sarah said quietly, it's going to happen soon. When it does, the only systems that will still work are the old mechanical ones. We need to evacuate everyone to the steel sections. Veltar turned to look at her. His crystal face was flickering with colors that Sarah had never seen before. What do you know about this? He asked. I've been studying it for weeks, Sarah said. The crystals in the asteroids are creating a resonance cascade. It's going to destroy every crystal-based system on this platform. For a moment, Sarah thought Veltar might finally listen to her. But then his face hardened again. Impossible, he said. Zephyrian crystal technology is the most advanced in the galaxy. It cannot be destroyed by primitive rocks. Sarah felt her last hope die. Even now, with the evidence all around them, Veltar's pride would not let him admit that a human might be right. "Sir, please," she said one last time, and just move the essential personnel to the backup sections. "If I'm wrong, nothing happens. If I'm right, you are wrong," Veltar said firmly. "And I will not panic my crew based on the fears of a primitive human." Sarah left the control room feeling defeated. She had done everything she could to warn them. Now all she could do was make sure that when the cascade hit, at least some of them would survive. She went back to Engineering Bay 7 and made her final preparations. The backup power systems were ready. The emergency supplies were in place. The old steel bulkheads would protect anyone who was inside when the crystals started screaming. Outside, the asteroids glowed brighter than ever, and the platform shook like a leaf in a storm. Sarah sat at her old computer and watched the energy readings climb toward critical levels. Soon, very soon, the quiet humans' warnings would be proven right in the most terrible way possible. It started at 3:47 in the morning. Sarah was sleeping in her small room when a sound woke her up. It was not like any sound she had ever heard before. It was high and sharp and seemed to cut right through her skull. The sound was coming from everywhere. At once, like the platform itself was screaming, she jumped out of bed and ran to her workstation. Her old computers were flashing red warnings. The energy readings from the asteroids had gone beyond anything her equipment could measure. The numbers were just showing error messages now, but Sarah did not need numbers to know what was happening. She could hear it. The crystal sections of the platform were singing. It was not a beautiful song. It was the sound of crystal being torn apart from the inside. Every piece of Zephyrian crystal technology on the platform was vibrating at the same frequency as the crystals in the asteroids. The vibration was getting stronger and stronger. Just like Sarah had predicted, she grabbed her emergency radio and switched to the old human frequency. "This is Dr. Chun in Engineering Bay 7. The cascade has started. All personnel need to get to the steel sections immediately. Stay away from any crystal technology. Alarms were going off everywhere now. But they were not the smooth Zephyrian alarms. Those had already stopped working. The sounds Sarah heard were from the old mechanical warning systems that she had prepared. Sarah ran through the corridors toward the main areas of the platform. As she ran, she could see cracks appearing in the crystal walls. The beautiful blue glow that had always lit the upper levels was flickering and changing color. Some sections were turning red. Others were flashing white so bright it hurt to look at them. She reached the main control room and found Chaos. Chief Engineer Veltar was standing in front of his control panel, but the panel was not working. The crystal surface was covered with cracks, and sparks were shooting out from the damaged sections. Other Zephyrian engineers were running around, trying to use equipment that was falling apart in their hands. "What is happening?" Veltar shouted when he saw Sarah. His voice was different now. The musical quality was gone, replaced by fear and confusion. "The resonance cascade," Sarah said. "Just like I warned you. The crystals in the asteroids are making all your crystal technology vibrate itself to pieces." As if to prove her point, one of the large control panels on the far wall suddenly exploded. Pieces of crystal flew everywhere, and the Zephyrian engineer who had been using it cried out in pain as the sharp fragments cut his crystal skin. "This is impossible," Veltar said, but his voice was weak. He could see his beautiful technology destroying itself, and he could not understand why. "We need to evacuate everyone to the steel sections," Sarah said. "The cascade is just starting. It's going to get much worse." Before Veltar could answer, another explosion rocked the control room. This time it was the main power distribution panel. When it blew apart, all the lights went out. For a moment, everything was dark and quiet except for the terrible singing sound that continued to come from the damaged crystals. Then Sarah's emergency lighting system came on. It was not as bright as the crystal lights had been, but it was steady and reliable. "How?" Veltar asked, staring at the lights. "Old human backup systems," Sarah said. "Steel and copper wires. Mechanical switches, they don't resonate like crystals do. More Zephyrians were coming into the control room now, looking for orders from their chief engineer. But Veltar seemed frozen, unable to accept what was happening to his perfect technology. Sarah realized that if anyone was going to take charge, it would have to be her. "Listen to me, everyone," she called out in a voice loud enough to be heard over the crystal screaming. "The crystal technology is failing. We need to move to the lower levels where the old steel systems are still working. We do not take orders from humans," said one of the Zephyrian engineers. But even as he spoke, another control panel behind him cracked and went dark. "Then give me a better plan," Sarah said. "Because in about 10 minutes, there won't be any working crystal technology left on this platform." The Zephyrian could not answer. None of them could. They had never planned for their perfect technology to fail. Sarah turned to Veltar. "Sir? You're the chief engineer? Your people need orders? What do you want them to do?" Veltar looked around at his broken control room. Sarah could see him struggling with the idea that a human might be right when all his advanced instruments were wrong. Finally, he spoke in a voice that was barely a whisper. "Follow the human's instructions," he said. It was the hardest thing he had ever said. But it was also the beginning of their survival. Sarah immediately took charge. She had been preparing for this moment for weeks, and she knew exactly what needed to be done. "Engineering teams, follow me to Bay 7, she called out. "Medical personnel, go to Sick Bay 2 in the lower levels. Security teams, help evacuate civilians from the upper levels. Stay away from any crystal surfaces and use the old steel stairways, not the crystal lifts." The Zephyrians moved slowly at first. They were not used to taking orders from anyone except their own kind, especially not from a human. But as more crystal systems failed around them, they began to realize that Sarah's plan was their only hope. Sarah led the engineering teams through corridors that were becoming more dangerous by the minute. The crystal walls were developing larger cracks, and some sections were starting to crumble. The singing sound was getting louder too, rising to a pitch that made everyone cover their ears. When they reached Engineering Bay 7, Sarah showed them what she had prepared. The old steel computers were still working perfectly. The mechanical control systems were running smoothly. The backup power was steady and reliable. "How long have you been planning this?" asked Jenka, one of the younger Zephyrian engineers. 3 weeks, Sarah said as she started bringing more backup systems online. "Ever since I first detected the resonance crystals in the asteroids." "You tried to warn us," Jenka said quietly. "Many times," Sarah replied. She was not angry about it now. There was no time for anger. There was only time to save as many lives as possible. The platform shook violently as another major crystal system failed somewhere in the upper levels. Sarah could hear the sound of breaking crystal and the shouts of people who were trying to evacuate. "Thomas's," Sarah called into her radio. The Big Soros had been helping her prepare the backup systems, and she knew she could count on him. "Here, Sarah," came Thomas's deep voice over the radio. "How many people have made it to the safe areas?" "Maybe half," Thomas's reported. "Other half still in crystal sections, some scared to leave, some not believe danger real." Sarah knew she had to do something about the people who were still in the dangerous areas. The cascade was accelerating, and soon the entire upper level would be uninhabitable. "I'm going to try to reach them," she told the engineers in Bay 7. "Keep working on the backup systems. If anything happens to me, Thomas knows how everything works." "You cannot go up there," Veltar said. He had followed the engineering teams to the lower levels, and Sarah could see that he was badly shaken by everything that had happened. "The crystal sections are too dangerous now." "People are still up there," Sarah said simply. "Someone has to help them." She grabbed a protective suit from the emergency locker. It was an old human design, made from thick metal and fabric instead of the lightweight crystal fiber suits that everyone else used. It was heavy and uncomfortable, but it would protect her from the sharp crystal fragments that were flying everywhere. Sarah made her way back up to the middle levels, where many of the crew quarters were located. The journey was like walking through a war zone. Crystal panels were exploding randomly, sending sharp pieces flying through the air. The walls were covered with cracks that grew larger as she watched, and the screaming sound was so loud now that she could feel it in her bones. She found a group of Krytic workers huddled in their quarters, too frightened to move. The insect-like beings were clicking their mandibles nervously and wrapping their arms around themselves. "You have to come with me," Sarah told them. "This whole section is going to collapse soon." "Too dangerous outside," clicked their leader, Craked H. "Crystal pieces everywhere." "We stay here." Sarah looked around their quarters. The room had crystal lighting and crystal-based air recycling. Already, the lights were flickering, and she could smell something burning from the air system. "It's more dangerous to stay," she said. "Follow me." "I know a safe path to the lower levels." She led them through corridors she had memorized during her weeks of preparation. These were the oldest parts of the platform, where human builders had used steel and concrete instead of crystal. The walls here were cracked from the vibrations, but they were not falling apart like the crystal sections. Sarah made 3 more trips to rescue people from the dangerous areas. Each time, the journey was more difficult. The crystal sections were failing faster now, and some corridors were completely blocked by fallen debris. On her last trip, she found a group of nebulae trapped in the power section. The gaseous beings were swirling around in panic, unable to understand why their energy-based systems were failing. Sarah could not speak their language very well, but she knew they could understand simple concepts. She showed them her working flashlight and pointed toward the safe areas. She made gestures to indicate that they should follow her. The nebulae were reluctant to leave their power systems, but when one of the main energy conduits exploded right next to them, they quickly decided to follow the human who seemed to know what she was doing. By the time Sarah led the last group of survivors to the lower levels, the upper sections of the platform were almost completely destroyed. The beautiful crystal spires that had been the pride of Zephian engineering were now twisted wreckage. The smooth, glowing walls were shattered ruins. But in Engineering Bay 7 and the other steel sections, life continued. Sarah's backup systems were keeping the air clean and the lights on. Her mechanical computers were monitoring what was left of the platform systems. Her simple radio network was allowing the survivors to communicate with each other. Most importantly, everyone was alive. Sarah sat down at her old computer and looked at the readings from her sensors. The cascade was finally starting to slow down. The energy from the asteroids was still there, but it was not growing stronger anymore. The crystals had either been destroyed or had vibrated themselves into harmless fragments. Chief Engineer Veltar came up behind her and looked at the screen. "Is it over?" he asked. "The worst part," Sarah said, "but we're not safe yet. The platform is badly damaged, and we're still in the middle of an unstable asteroid field. We need to find a way to get everyone off this platform and back to civilization." Veltar nodded slowly. For the first time since Sarah had known him, he looked at her with respect instead of dismissal. "What do you need?" he asked. Sarah smiled. It was a tired smile, but it was genuine. Finally, someone was asking the right question. "I need everyone to work together," she said, "because getting home is going to be a lot harder than surviving the cascade." The morning after the cascade brought new problems that Sarah had not expected. She was checking the platform systems when Thomas's came running into Engineering Bay 7. The big Soros looked worried, which was unusual for him. "Sarah, we have big problem," he said in his slow, deep voice. "Food machine's not working. Water maker's broken too. People getting scared." Sarah looked up from her computer screen. She had been so focused on keeping the basic life support running that she had not thought about food and water. The platform had always used crystal-based systems to process food and clean water. With those systems destroyed, the survivors would run out of supplies in just a few days. "How much emergency food do we have?" Sarah asked. "Maybe 3 days for everyone," Thomas replied. "Water, maybe 2 days." Sarah felt her stomach drop. Surviving the cascade had been just the first problem. Now, she had to figure out how to keep over 200 beings alive with no working food or water systems. She walked to the main gathering area where the survivors were staying. It was one of the old steel sections that had been used for storage. Before the cascade, now it was home to Zephyrians, Krytek, Soros, Nebulae, and the few other humans who worked on the platform. The different species were sitting in separate groups, just like they always had. But now there was something different in the way they looked at each other. The disaster had shown them that their differences were not as important as their survival. Chief Engineer Veltar was sitting with the other. Zephyrians, his crystal body, was dimmer than it used to be, and Sarah could see small cracks in his surface where flying debris had hit him during the evacuation. When he saw her coming, he stood up. "Dr. Chun," he said formally. It was the first time he had ever used her title. "The crew is asking about food and water. Our people are worried." Sarah looked around at all the faces watching her. These beings had spent their whole lives being told that Zephyrians were the smartest and most advanced species in the galaxy. But now they were looking to a human for answers. "The crystal-based food and water systems are destroyed," Sarah said honestly. "But that doesn't mean we can't survive. We just have to do things differently." "How?" asked Jenka, the young Zephyrian engineer who had been one of the first to listen to Sarah during the evacuation. Sarah had been thinking about this problem since Thomas's told her about the food shortage. "We go back to basics," she said. "Before there were crystal food processors, people used simpler methods, heat, pressure, chemical reactions. We can build systems that work the same way." She led them to one of the maintenance areas where spare parts and raw materials were stored. Most of it was old human equipment that the Zephyrians had considered obsolete. "See this?" Sarah said, pointing to a large metal tank. This was used for water processing before they installed the crystal systems. It uses mechanical filters and chemical treatment. We can get it working again. The Krytek leader, clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. "How long to fix?" "If we all work together, maybe 12 hours, Sarah said. "But I'll need help from everyone. Not just the engineers." This was a new idea for most of the survivors. On Zephyrian ships, each species had specific jobs and did not mix with the others. Engineers were engineers, miners were miners, and security guards were security guards, but Sarah needed all kinds of skills to solve their survival problems. She organized teams based on what needed to be done, not on what species people were. Krytek workers helped Zephyrian engineers rebuild water filters. Soros security guards worked with human technicians to repair food processors. Even the Nebulae, who had always worked alone, joined teams to help power the old mechanical systems. The work was hard and dirty. The old human equipment was heavy and required lots of manual labor to operate. The Zephyrians, who were used to controlling everything with thought commands, had to learn how to use wrenches and screwdrivers and welding torches, but something amazing happened as they worked together. The different species started talking to each other in ways they never had before. They shared ideas and techniques. They helped each other solve problems. Sarah found herself becoming the coordinator for all of these activities. People brought her problems, and she helped them find solutions. When the water filter team could not figure out how to seal a pipe connection, she showed them an old human technique using metal clamps and rubber gaskets. When the food processing team ran into trouble with heating elements, she taught them how to wire electrical circuits. "You know many things," observed Veltar as he watched Sarah help a mixed team of Krytek and Soros workers repair a food preparation unit. "I've always been curious about how things work," Sarah replied. "When you don't have the fanciest equipment, you learn to make do with what you have." Veltar was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "We never asked you what you thought about our designs. We assumed our way was better because it was more advanced." Sarah looked at the Zephyrian chief engineer. She could see that admitting this was difficult for him. "Advanced doesn't always mean better," she said gently. "Sometimes simple solutions work when complex ones fail." By the end of the first day, they had water flowing again. It was not as pure as the crystal-processed water had been, and it took More time to produce, but it was clean and safe to drink. The food processing took longer. They had to build heating systems from scratch and figure out how to prepare meals for different species with different dietary needs. But Sarah had studied the platform's food stores during her weeks of preparation, and she knew what was available. Krydic eat mostly proteins, she explained to the cooking teams. Soros need lots of minerals. Zephyrians can absorb nutrients directly from liquid solutions. Nebulae feed on electrical energy. Humans are omnivores and can eat almost anything. She showed them how to prepare different types of meals using the same basic equipment. It required careful planning and coordination, but it worked. On the third day after the cascade, Sarah faced a new crisis. The platform's position in the asteroid field was becoming dangerous. The cascade had not just affected the platform. It had also changed the movement patterns of the asteroids themselves. Rocks that had been stable for months were now drifting in new directions. Some of them were heading straight for the damaged platform. Sarah was studying the sensor readings. When Thomas's came to find her, "Big rock coming," he reported. "Maybe hit platform in 6 hours." Sarah looked at the data. The asteroid was not huge, but it was big enough to cause serious damage to their already weakened home. And with most of the platform's maneuvering systems destroyed, they had no way to move out of its path. "Can we break it up?" asked Jenka, who had become Sarah's unofficial assistant. "Our mining lasers are crystal-based," Sarah replied. "They were destroyed in the cascade. What about the mining ships?" suggested Velter. Sarah checked the communications with the ships that had been working in the asteroid field when the cascade hit. 3 of the 5 ships had been destroyed when their crystal hulls shattered. The other 2 had made it back to the platform, but they were badly damaged and not safe to fly. "We need a different approach," Sarah said. She studied the problem from every angle she could think of. They could not move the platform. They could not destroy the asteroid. They could not fly away in ships. But maybe they did not need to do any of those things. "What if we don't try to avoid the collision?" Sarah said suddenly. Everyone in the room stared at her. "You want asteroid to hit us?" Thomas asked in confusion. "Not exactly," Sarah said. "But what if we use the collision to solve another problem at the same time?" She pulled up a map of the platform's current position in the asteroid field. They were surrounded by unstable rocks that could drift into them at any time, but there was a clear path that led away from the most dangerous areas. "If we can control the collision, we might be able to use it to push the platform in the direction we want to go," Sarah explained. It was a crazy idea. Instead of trying to avoid the asteroid, they would let it hit them, but in a way that would move the platform toward safety instead of destroying it. The plan required precise calculations and perfect timing. Sarah worked with teams of engineers from all species to figure out exactly where the asteroid needed to hit and how fast it needed to be moving. They used the old human computers to run the calculations. Since those were the only systems still working, the numbers had to be perfect. If the asteroid hit too hard or in the wrong place, it would break the platform apart. If it hit too softly or at the wrong angle, it would not push them far enough. "This is very dangerous," Veltar said when Sarah explained the plan to the full group of survivors. "Everything is dangerous now," Sarah replied. "But this gives us a chance to get to a safer part of the asteroid field. If we stay here more, rocks will hit us eventually and we won't be able to control those collisions." The survivors voted to try Sarah's plan. It was not an easy decision, but they had learned to trust her judgment. The preparation took most of the remaining time they had. They moved everyone to the strongest part of the platform and secured everything that could come loose during the impact. They reinforced the steel bulkheads and prepared emergency systems in case something went wrong. Sarah spent the last hour before impact making final adjustments to their positioning. She used the platform's old mechanical thrusters systems that the Zephyrians had planned to remove because they were inefficient compared to crystal propulsion. Now those inefficient old thrusters were their only hope of surviving. Asteroid impact in 60 seconds. Jenka announced from the sensor station. Sarah watched the displays showing the asteroid's approach. It was moving at exactly the right speed and heading for exactly the right spot. If her calculations were correct, the impact would push them toward the safer region of the asteroid field. If her calculations were wrong, they would all be dead in less than a minute. 30 seconds? Jenka called out. Sarah looked around at the faces of the beings who had chosen to trust her with their lives. Zephyrians who had once thought humans were primitive. Krydik who had never worked with other species before. Soros who had always followed orders without question. Nebulae who had barely interacted with solid beings at all. Now they were all depending on the quiet human engineer who had tried to warn them about the cascade. 10 seconds, Jenka announced. Sarah closed her eyes and hoped that her simple steel and iron technology would be strong enough to save them all. The impact, when it came, felt like the end of the world. The collision shook the platform harder than anything Sarah had ever felt. The sound was like thunder that went on forever. Metal groaned and twisted. People screamed. Emergency lights flickered as power systems struggled to stay online. But the platform held together. Sarah opened her eyes and looked at her instruments. The old steel computers were still working, still showing her the information she needed. The asteroid had hit exactly where she had planned, and the platform was moving in the right direction. Status report, she called out over the emergency communication system. Hull breach in Section 12, came Thos's voice. But sealed doors holding, no air loss. Power system stable, reported Jenka from the engineering station. All mechanical. Backups functioning. Medical team reporting minor injuries only, added Dr. Keshra, the Zephyrian medical officer who had learned to work with human first aid equipment. Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. The crazy plan had worked. They had survived the controlled collision, and now they were moving away from the most dangerous part of the asteroid field, but their problems were not over yet. Sarah, called Craked H from the sensor station. More. Asteroids ahead and something else. Sarah hurried to look at the display. The collision had pushed them toward a safer area, but there were still obstacles in their path. Worse, the sensors were showing something that had not been there before. What is that? Asked Veltar, pointing at a large object on the screen. Sarah studied the readings carefully. It was big and metallic and moving under its own power. It's a ship, she said, a rescue ship. Everyone in the room started talking at once. After days of struggle and danger, help was finally coming, but Sarah was still studying the sensor data, and what she saw made her worried. The ship is having problems, she announced. Its engines are flickering and it's moving erratically. Crystal-based propulsion, Veltar said quietly. The resonance field is still affecting it. Sarah realized what was happening. The cascade had not just affected their platform. The strange energy from the asteroids was still there, still interfering with crystal-based technology. Any ship that came too close would suffer the same fate as their platform. We have to warn them, Sarah said. She tried to contact the rescue ship using the old radio systems, but the ship was not responding to their frequency. They probably don't even have equipment that can hear us, Jenka said. Modern ships only use crystal-based communication. Sarah watched the rescue ship getting closer to the asteroid field. She could see that its crystal hull was already starting to show stress fractures. If it came much closer, it would be destroyed. Just like their platform had been. We have to go to them, Sarah said. How? Asked Thomas's. Our ship's broken too. Sarah had been thinking about this problem since the cascade. All of their modern ships had been destroyed, but there was one old vessel that might still work. Emergency Pod 7, she said. It's an old human-built escape pod. Steel hull, mechanical systems, chemical rockets. It should be immune to the resonance effect. Veltar looked skeptical. That pod is 50 years old. It was scheduled for scrapping. Old doesn't mean broken, Sarah replied. Sometimes old means reliable. She led a team to the docking bay where Emergency Pod 7 was stored. The pod was indeed old and looked nothing like the sleek crystal ships that everyone was used to. It was gray and bulky, with thick metal walls. and tiny windows. But when Sarah powered it up, all the systems came online perfectly. "I'll go alone," she said. "The pod only has life support for one person anyway." "Too dangerous," Thomas's protested. "What if pod fails? What if you cannot stop? Rescue ship?" "Then you'll figure out another way," Sarah said simply. "You've all learned to work together. You don't need me to solve every problem anymore." Before anyone could argue further, Sarah sealed herself into the old pod and launched toward the rescue ship. The journey through the asteroid field was terrifying. The pod had no fancy navigation systems, just basic radar and simple controls. Sarah had to manually pilot around floating chunks of rock, some of them glowing with the same strange energy that had caused all their problems. But the old pod's thick steel hull protected her from the crystal fragments, and its simple mechanical systems kept working no matter how strong the resonance field became. As she got closer to the rescue ship, Sarah could see that it was in serious trouble. The beautiful crystal hull was covered with cracks, and pieces were breaking off and floating away. The ship was spinning slowly, clearly out of control. Sarah managed to dock her pod with the rescue ship's emergency airlock. It was not easy, since both vessels were moving erratically, but her experience with simple mechanical systems helped her make the connection. She found the rescue ship's crew in a state of panic. There were 12 beings aboard, all different species, and their captain was a Zephyrian named Commander Thalva. "Who are you?" the commander demanded when Sarah entered their control room. "How did you get here?" "I'm Dr. Sarah Chun from the Kepler's Edge platform," Sarah said. "We detected your ship in distress and came to help." "Impossible," said Commander Thalva. "The Kepler's Edge was destroyed. Our sensors showed massive crystal system failures throughout that entire region. The platform is damaged but not destroyed," Sarah explained. "The crystal systems failed, but the old steel-based systems are still working. That's how I was able to reach you." She looked around at the rescue ship's control room. Like every modern ship, it was built entirely from crystal technology. And like the platform had been, it was tearing itself apart from the inside. "You need to abandon this ship immediately," Sarah told them. "The resonance field will destroy it completely within hours." "Abandon ship?" Commander Thalva sounded shocked. "This is the most advanced rescue vessel in the fleet. Our crystal technology can handle any situation." "Not this situation," Sarah said firmly. "I've been studying this phenomenon for weeks. Crystal-based technology cannot survive in this resonance field. The only reason I'm still alive is because I'm using old mechanical systems." To prove her point, one of the ship's control panels suddenly cracked and went dark. The rescue crew jumped back in alarm. "My escape pod can carry 4 people at a time," Sarah continued. "It will take 3 trips to get everyone back to the platform safely." Commander Thalva looked around at his failing ship. Sarah could see him struggling with the same pride that had made it hard for Veltar to accept help from a human. "How do we know your platform is safe?" he asked. "Because we learned to adapt," Sarah said. "We stopped depending on crystal technology and went back to simpler methods that actually work in this environment." It took 2 more system failures before Commander Thalva agreed to evacuate his crew. The first trip was the hardest, because the rescue crew had never been in such a cramped, primitive vessel. They were used to smooth crystal ships with thought-controlled systems, not noisy metal pods with manual controls, but they quickly learned to appreciate the pod's reliability when they saw their own ship continue to break apart behind them. During the second trip, Commander Thalva asked Sarah how the platform survivors were managing without crystal technology. "We work together," Sarah said simply. "Everyone contributes what they can, regardless of their species or their usual job. We've learned that cooperation is more important than having the fanciest equipment." "You make it sound easy," the commander sighed. "It's not easy," Sarah admitted, "but it's possible. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the strongest ones." When Sarah brought the last group of rescue crew back to the platform, she found that the other survivors had been busy. They had prepared living space for the newcomers and had hot food waiting for them. More importantly, they had continued working on improvements to their survival systems. The Krytic had figured out how to make the water purification more efficient. The Soros had strengthened the hull repairs. The Zephyrians had designed better ways to distribute power through the mechanical systems. You did all this while I was gone? Sarah asked Veltar. We learned from watching you, he replied. You taught us that the best solutions come from everyone working together, not from one person making all the decisions. Commander Thelva was amazed by what he saw. How is this possible? He asked. Your platform suffered catastrophic damage, but these people seem to be thriving. They learned to adapt, Sarah said. When their advanced technology failed, they didn't give up. They found new ways to solve old problems. Over the next few days, the platform continued its slow journey toward the edge of the asteroid field. The rescue crew worked alongside the original survivors, learning the new ways of doing things that necessity had taught them. Commander Thelva sent messages to the rescue fleet, warning them about the dangers of the resonance field and explaining how to approach safely. He used the platform's old radio system since the modern communication networks could not penetrate the interference. You saved us all, he told Sarah one evening as they watched the asteroid field slowly pass by outside the observation windows. We saved ourselves, Sarah corrected. I just happened to know some things about old technology that turned out to be useful. It was more than that, said Veltar, who had been listening to their conversation. You saw a problem that none of us could see. You prepared for a disaster that none of us believed would happen. And when everything went wrong, you kept us all alive. Sarah looked around at the busy activity in the platform's common areas. Beings from different species were working together, sharing meals, even playing games together. The disaster had brought them closer than they had ever been. Before, I'm not a hero, she said quietly. I'm just an engineer who likes to understand how things work. That's exactly what made you a hero, Commander Thelva said. You understood what others missed, and you never stopped trying to help, even when no one would listen to you. 3. Weeks later, a fleet of specially modified ships arrived to evacuate the platform. The ships had been retrofitted with mechanical backup systems based on the designs that Sarah and her teams had developed. As the survivors prepared to leave their damaged home, many of them asked Sarah where she wanted to go next. She had job offers from a dozen different companies, all eager to hire the human engineer who had saved an entire platform using primitive technology. But Sarah had already made her decision. I want to go back to engineering school, she said. There's a lot more to learn about how different technologies can work together. Will you teach? Asked Jenka. Maybe, Sarah said, if students want to learn about simple solutions to complex problems. As the evacuation ships carried the survivors away from the asteroid field, Sarah looked back at the damaged platform one last time. It had not been beautiful like the crystal spires that once topped it, but it had been strong. It had endured when everything else failed, just like the quiet human who had saved them all. Years later, when engineers throughout the galaxy studied the Kepler's Edge incident, they would learn about the importance of redundant systems and the value of simple, reliable technology. They would learn that sometimes the most advanced solution is not the best solution. But most importantly, they would learn that true engineering is not about building the most impressive structures. It is about building things that work when everything else fails. And sometimes the person who builds those things is someone that everyone else overlooks until it is almost too late.